The Great Hall of Prime was the most beautiful place Commander Vance had ever seen. Crystal pillars rose from the floor like frozen waterfalls, catching light from 3 distant suns and throwing rainbows across the gathered delegates. 12 species had come to this world. 12 ancient civilizations, each one older than human recorded history, each one powerful enough to crush Earth's young colonies without effort. And yet they had invited humanity to join them. Stood at the edge of the chamber, her dress uniform pressed and perfect, her dark hair pulled back in the tight regulation style she had worn for 15 years of service. She was 43 years old. She had fought in 2 border conflicts, negotiated 3 ceasefires, and buried more friends than she cared to count. Earth's leaders had chosen her for this mission because she did not break, because she stayed calm when others panicked, because she believed, truly believed, that peace was possible. The High Speaker moved to the center of the hall. His name was, and he was terrifying to look at. His species resembled Earth insects grown to the size of men, with hard shells of deep purple and mandibles that clicked when he spoke. 6 legs carried him forward with unsettling grace. 2 arms, ending in clawed hands, spread wide in welcome. "Friends," said, his voice translated through the small device in his ear, "we gather for the rite of tranquility. This ceremony has bound our species together for 10,000 years. Today, we consider a new member, the humans." Felt the weight of every alien eye upon her. Some looked curious, others looked doubtful. A few, she noticed, looked afraid. She did not understand why. Humanity was young and weak compared to these ancient powers. What could they possibly fear? "The rite is simple," continued. "Each representative will turn their back to the assembly. This is the gesture of absolute trust. We bare ourselves to potential attack, showing that we believe in the peace we have built. No weapons may be carried. No shields may be raised. For 3 days we will discuss humanity's place among us." One by one, the delegates performed the gesture. The tall, tree-like beings called the turn slowly, their bark-covered bodies creaking. The small, quick, with their silver fur and bright eyes, spun in place and turned together. The massive, like living mountains of stone, rumbled as they showed their backs to the chamber. Then it was turn. She walked to the center of the hall, her boots clicking against the crystal floor. Her heart beat steady and strong. She was not afraid. She had trained for this moment. She had dreamed of it. Humanity's first true step into the galactic community. An end to the isolation that had defined their species since they first left Earth. Turned her back to the assembly. She heard moving behind her. She heard the soft sound of his legs against the floor. She heard something else too, a faint hum, like a machine powering up. It was a sound she knew, a sound that had no place in this chamber of peace. The plasma bolt struck her between the shoulder blades. The pain was beyond anything she had ever felt. It was fire and ice and lightning all at once, tearing through her body. She fell forward, her face striking the crystal floor, her vision going dark at the edges. She could not breathe. She could not scream. She could only lie there, broken and burning. Above her, his voice rang out through the hall. "Humans have been judged unsuitable for the galactic concord." Tried to move. Her body refused. She could hear chaos erupting around her, voices shouting in languages she did not understand, feet and legs and other appendages moving past her, but no one came to help her. No one knelt beside her. No one tried to save her life. "They are too violent," continued, "too unpredictable. Their history is written in blood, war after war, conflict after conflict. They cannot be trusted. They will never be trusted. This is the judgment of and it is final." His thoughts were fading. She was dying. She knew she was dying. The plasma had burned through her uniform, through her skin, through muscle and bone. No human could survive such a wound. No human should survive such a wound. But was not just any human. Deep inside her body, machines smaller than blood cells began to wake. They were microscopic robots designed by Earth's military scientists after decades of brutal warfare. Every soldier, every diplomat, every human who traveled beyond Earth's protection carried them. They were humanity's answer to a universe that had proven, again and again, that it wanted to kill them. The flooded toward the wound. They began to seal torn blood vessels, to cool burned tissue, to keep heart beating when it wanted to stop. They could not heal her, not completely, not from a wound this severe, but they could keep her alive. They could buy her time. Lay still. She forced herself to stay silent. She let them think she was dead. Dispose of the body, ordered. Send word to their colony on. Tell them their ambassador died in an unfortunate accident during the ceremony. Tell them we offer our deepest condolences. Tell them we hope this tragedy will not affect our peaceful relations. Hands grabbed arms and legs. They were hands, cold and hard like the shells of beetles. They dragged her across the crystal floor, leaving a trail of blood behind. She kept her eyes closed. She kept her breathing shallow. She let them believe she was nothing more than a corpse. They took her to a waste chute, a hole in the floor that led down into the darkness below the city. Without ceremony, without care, they pushed her over the edge. Fell. She fell for what felt like forever, tumbling through darkness, bouncing off metal walls and rusted pipes. The pain was constant, overwhelming, threatening to pull her back into unconsciousness. But she held on. She refused to let go. Finally, she landed. The impact drove the air from her lungs and sent fresh agony through her burned back. She lay in a mountain of garbage and waste, in the forgotten depths of Prime, surrounded by the things the aliens had thrown away. She was alive. Against all odds, against all reason, she was alive. And somewhere in the darkness of that alien hell, Commander Vance of Earth began to smile. It was not a kind smile. It was not a forgiving smile. It was the smile of a human who had been shot in the back during a ceremony of peace. It was the smile of someone who intended to survive. Time had no meaning in the darkness. Drifted in and out of consciousness, her body fighting a war she could not see. The worked without rest, sealing wounds, fighting infection, keeping her broken body alive through sheer technological stubbornness. Human medicine had learned its lessons the hard way. Centuries of war had taught Earth scientists that soldiers needed to survive impossible things. They had built machines to make that possible. When finally opened her eyes, she found herself staring at a ceiling of rusted metal and dripping pipes. The smell was terrible, a mix of rotting food and chemical waste and things she did not want to identify. She lay in a pile of garbage that had cushioned her fall, surrounded by broken machines and discarded containers and the cast-off trash of an alien civilization. She tried to move. Pain exploded through her back, so intense that she nearly screamed. She bit down on her lip, tasting blood, forcing herself to stay silent. She did not know if anyone was nearby. She did not know if they had guards in this forgotten place. She could not afford to be discovered. Slowly, carefully, she rolled onto her side. The movement took everything she had. Sweat poured down her face. Her hands shook, but she managed it. She lay there for a long moment, gasping for breath, waiting for the pain to become bearable. Then she began to take stock of her situation. Her uniform was ruined, burned through at the back, stiff with dried blood. Her communicator was gone, lost somewhere in the fall. Her weapons had been taken before the ceremony. Part of the trust ritual she now understood had been nothing but a trap. She had no food, no water, no medicine beyond the still working inside her. But she was alive, and she was a human. Had grown up on stories of human survival. The early colonists who had crossed oceans in wooden ships, the explorers who had walked to the poles of Earth through ice and snow, the first astronauts who had left their planet in machines held together by hope and mathematics. Humans did not die easily. Humans did not give up. She forced herself to sit. The pain was overwhelming, but she pushed through it. She looked around, searching for anything useful in the garbage around her. After a few minutes, she found a piece of metal, long and thin, with a sharp edge. It was not much of a weapon, but it was something. Next, she found water. A pipe above her head dripped steadily, and she cupped her hands beneath it, drinking the bitter liquid. It tasted like rust and chemicals, but her would filter out anything dangerous. She drank until her thirst was satisfied. Finally, she checked the one thing she had been afraid to check. Her hand went to her left arm, pressing against the skin just above her wrist. There, buried deep in her flesh, was a subdermal transmitter. It was standard equipment for all high-ranking officers, a last resort for emergencies. They had taken her communicator, but they had not known about this. Pressed her fingers against the transmitter in a specific pattern. Once, twice, 3 times. She felt a tiny vibration beneath her skin, confirming that the device was still working. She sent her message. The transmission was short, encoded in a way that only human military systems could understand. It contained her identification, her location, and 2 words that would change everything. Contingency 7. Then she began to climb. The OV Prime was a maze of tunnels and forgotten passages, built and rebuilt over thousands of years. Moved through it slowly, stopping often to rest, fighting against the pain that threatened to send her back into unconsciousness. Her back was a landscape of agony. Every movement pulled at the sealed wounds. Every breath reminded her of how close she had come to death. But she kept moving. As she climbed, she thought about what had happened. They had planned this from the beginning. The rite of tranquility was not a ceremony of peace. It was an execution. They invited species to join them, made them vulnerable, and then eliminated any they considered a threat. How many others had died this way? How many civilizations had been murdered before they could grow strong enough to challenge power? And the other species had done nothing. They had watched as shot her in the back. They had said nothing as her body was dragged away. They were either afraid of them or they agreed with them. Either way, they had made their choice. Now humanity would make its choice too. Climbed for hours. She lost count of how many levels she passed, how many ladders she struggled up, how many times she nearly fell. But finally she saw light ahead. Real light, not the dim glow of emergency lamps. Sunlight filtering down through a grate in the ceiling. She emerged in an alley between 2 tall buildings. The city of Prime spread out before her, crystal towers reaching toward the sky, alien vehicles humming through the air, citizens of a dozen species going about their daily lives. None of them noticed the human woman crawling out of a drainage grate, her uniform torn and bloody, her face pale with pain. Found a shadow and hid there, watching and waiting. She needed to find a communication center. She needed to reach the other species, the ones who had broken no laws, the ones who might still be convinced that what happened was wrong. She found it after sunset, a small relay station on the edge of the city, lightly guarded, connected to the main broadcast network. She watched the guards for an hour, learning their patterns. Then she moved. The guard never saw her coming. One moment he was standing at his post, bored and tired. The next moment, a piece of sharpened metal was at his throat, and a human voice was whispering in his ear. "Make a sound and you die," said. "Nod if you understand." The guard nodded. 5 minutes later, stood before a broadcast console, her face bloody but her eyes clear. She activated the recording system and began to speak. "This is Commander Vance of Earth. I am alive. The High Speaker shot me in the back during the Rite of Tranquility, a ceremony of peace. He did this in front of 12 species. None of you helped me. None of you spoke against it. You watched as I was shot and you said nothing." She paused, letting her words sink in. "To the other species of the galactic conquered, I say this. Remember what you saw today. Remember what you allowed to happen. When humanity comes to ask why, and we will come, remember that you had a choice. You could have spoken. You could have helped. You chose silence. You chose to let them murder us." Leaned closer to the camera. "We will remember too." She ended the transmission and disappeared into the night, leaving behind a galaxy that would never see humanity the same way again. Admiral Wei stood on the bridge of the UES Remembrance and stared at the message on his screen. He had read it 7 times. Each time, he felt the same cold anger building in his chest, the same quiet fury that every human learned to carry, buried deep, waiting for moments exactly like this. The message was simple. Ambassador Vance shot in the back during a peace ceremony, still alive, requesting contingency 7. Wei was 61 years old. He had served in the Earth Navy for 40 years. He had fought in the Rebellion, the Belt Wars, and the First Contact conflict that had nearly destroyed humanity 20 years ago. He had seen friends die. He had ordered men and women into battles they would not survive. He had done terrible things in the name of protecting his species. But he had never felt anger quite like this. They had studied humanity. Wei knew this because everyone studied everyone in the galaxy. They had read about human history, about the endless wars, about the violence that seemed built into the human soul. They had looked at Earth's bloody past and decided that humans were weak. A species that fought itself so often could never unite against an outside threat. They had made a terrible mistake. What they did not understand was that humans had learned from their wars. Every conflict, every battle, every drop of blood spilled had taught them something. How to fight, how to survive, how to come together when an enemy threatened them all. The same violence that made them seem weak was actually the source of their greatest strength. Wei turned to his communications officer. "Send the signal, we're moving." Within the hour, 12 ships of the Earth Navy dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the system. They were not the largest ships in the fleet. They were not the most powerful, but they were enough. 12 vessels, crewed by men and women who had heard what happened to their ambassador. 12 vessels filled with cold, patient anger. The defense fleet numbered 300 ships. They had been the dominant power in this sector for 10,000 years. They had crushed rebellions, conquered worlds, and destroyed any species that challenged their rule. When they saw the human ships approaching, they laughed. 12 ships, 12 tiny vessels against the might of the Empire. It was not even a threat, it was an insult. Admiral opened a communication channel. He broadcast on all frequencies, making sure that every ship in the system, every station, every colony could hear his words. "This is Admiral Wei of the Earth Navy, commanding the battleship Remembrance. 3 days ago, you invited our ambassador to a ceremony of peace. You asked her to trust you. You asked her to show her back to your high speaker as a gesture of faith. Then you shot her." Wei paused. His voice was calm, controlled. He had practiced this control for 40 years. "You shot an unarmed woman in the back during your own sacred rite. You violated your own laws. You broke your own traditions. And then you tried to hide what you had done. You threw her body away like garbage. You sent lies to our colonies, telling us she died in an accident." Around him, the bridge crew sat in perfect silence. Every eye was fixed on their stations. Every hand was steady on their controls. They had all heard the message. They all knew what had happened. "Commander Vance is alive," Wei continued. "She survived your attempt to murder her. She crawled out of your garbage pits and sent us the truth. The galaxy knows what you did. They watched your high speaker commit this crime and they said nothing. But we are not the galaxy. We are humanity." On the screen, Wei could see the fleet beginning to move. Hundreds of ships, organizing into attack formations. They still thought this was a joke. They still believed that 12 human vessels could not possibly threaten them. "You have one standard rotation to return our ambassador, alive and unharmed. If you do not, we will come for her ourselves, and you will learn what happens when humanity stops being diplomatic." He ended the transmission. The response came within minutes. It was not words. It was weapons fire. The fleet opened fire on the human vessels, confident in their overwhelming numbers, certain that they would destroy these foolish newcomers without effort. Wei watched the first missiles streak toward his ship. He felt no fear. He felt only a cold, hard satisfaction. "Weapons free," he said. The bridge exploded into controlled chaos. Orders flew back and forth. Systems powered up, targeting computers locked onto enemy vessels. The Remembrance and her sister ships surged forward, not retreating from the incoming fire but accelerating into it. This was what humans did. This was what centuries of war had taught them. When someone tried to kill you, you did not run. You did not hide. You made them pay for every shot they fired. You showed them that attacking humanity was the worst mistake they would ever make. The first cruiser exploded. Then the second. Then the third. The human ships moved through the enemy formation like wolves through a flock of sheep. They did not fight in neat lines like They did not follow predictable patterns. They wove and danced and struck from angles that should have been impossible. Human pilots had spent generations fighting each other. They had developed tactics that no other species had ever seen. Wei stood at the center of his bridge, watching the battle unfold. His face showed no emotion, but inside, something ancient and fierce was singing. Humanity had come to the stars hopping for peace. They had extended their hand in friendship again and again. And again, the galaxy had slapped that hand away. No more. They had made their choice when they shot Vance in the back. They had shown humanity exactly what they were. Now humanity would show them the same. The battle raged across the system. Ships exploded. Debris filled the void. And slowly, impossibly, the fleet began to fall. The battle lasted 4 hours. When it ended, the space around Prime was filled with the broken remains of starships. Debris clouds stretched for thousands of kilometers. Emergency beacons flashed in the darkness, calling for rescue that might never come. The fleet, once 300 ships strong, had been reduced to barely 100. The rest were dead, destroyed, or drifting without power. The human fleet had lost 2 ships. Admiral Wei stood on the bridge of the Remembrance and looked at the destruction before him. He felt no joy. He felt no triumph. He felt only tired. Killing was never something to celebrate, even when it was necessary, even when the enemy had started it. But he also felt something else. A grim satisfaction that the galaxy would never forget this day. That every species who had watched Vance get shot in the back would now understand exactly what that choice would cost them. "Admiral," his communications officer said, "we're receiving transmissions from 3 member species of the Conquered. And the. They're requesting emergency diplomatic channels." Wei nodded slowly. "Tell them we'll talk after we recover our ambassador, not before." On the surface of Prime, that ambassador was still fighting her own battle. Had spent the hours since her broadcast moving through the city, staying in shadows, avoiding patrols. Her back was on fire. They could only do so much. She needed real medical care, real rest, real treatment. But she could not stop. Not yet. She had one more thing to do. The communication center was not her only target. Throughout the city, there were public broadcast screens, huge displays that showed news and announcements to the citizens. Had hacked into the system using codes she had memorized years ago, during training exercises that she never thought she would actually need. Now, as the battle raged in space above, her face appeared on every screen in the city. "People of Prime," she said. Her voice was rough with pain, but her words were clear. "I am Commander Vance. Your leaders told you I was dead. They lied. They shot me in the back during a ceremony of peace, then threw my body away like trash. They expected me to die quietly." She paused, letting the citizens see her injuries, see the blood still staining her uniform. "I did not die, and now my people are here. They came for me. They came because humanity does not abandon its own. We do not accept murder disguised as justice. We do not pretend that betrayal is acceptable." Around the city, citizens stopped to stare at the screens. They had been told that the human ambassador died in an accident. They had been told that humanity had attacked without reason. Now they were learning the truth. Your High Speaker broke your most sacred law, continued. The right of tranquility was supposed to be a promise of safety. He made that promise a lie. He did not just betray humanity, he betrayed you. He betrayed everything your society claims to believe. The security forces were searching for her now. Could hear them in the streets, their hard legs clicking against the pavement. She did not have much time. Look at the sky, she said. Watch what happens when you break your word to humans. We came here in peace. We wanted to be your friends. We wanted to trade, to learn, to grow together. Your leader chose war. Now you will see what that choice costs. She ended the broadcast and moved again, disappearing into the maze of alleys and tunnels that ran beneath the city. Above, the human fleet was pushing closer to the planet. The remaining ships were falling back, trying to form a defensive line around there. But they were shaken now. They had lost too many vessels. They had watched impossible things happen. 12 human ships had destroyed 200 of their finest warships. How was this possible? They did not understand that humans had been at war for their entire history. Every generation had fought. Every century had brought new conflicts. Humans had developed weapons and tactics and strategies that no other species could imagine, because no other species had practiced war the way humans had. They had thought this made humans weak. They were learning too late that it made them terrifying. On the ground was receiving reports from his commanders. The fleet was crumbling. The public was seeing the human ambassadors' broadcasts. Other species were breaking from the conquered, reaching out to humanity for separate peace deals. Everything he had built was falling apart. He stood in his command center, surrounded by advisors and generals, and for the first time in his long life, he felt fear. "We must negotiate," one of his generals said. "We must offer them something. We cannot survive another assault." "What can we offer?" demanded. "We tried to kill their ambassador. We lied about it. What could we possibly give them that would satisfy their anger?" No one had an answer. In the tunnels beneath the city, heard the sound of fighting above. Human were landing. Marines in powered armor were moving through the streets, searching for her, ready to extract her from this nightmare. She found a maintenance hatch and climbed up into the light. She emerged in a plaza filled with chaos. Civilians were running. Human soldiers were advancing. The air was filled with the sound of weapons fire and shouted orders. A Marine saw her and immediately moved to protect her. "Commander Vance, are you Commander Vance?" "Yes," she said. Her voice was barely a whisper now. The adrenaline that had kept her moving was fading. The pain was overwhelming. "We have her," the Marine shouted into his radio. "The ambassador is alive. I repeat, the ambassador is alive." Felt strong arms catch her as her legs finally gave out. She was lifted, carried, rushed toward a waiting. Through fading vision, she saw the crystal towers of Prime rising against a sky filled with fire and debris. She had survived. Humanity had come for her. And they were about to learn the true meaning of consequence. The surrender came 3 days after the battle. Stood on the steps of the great conquered chamber, the same chamber where he had shot Vance in the back, and waited for the humans to accept his defeat. His mandibles trembled. His legs could barely hold him upright. The pride that had defined his entire life was gone, replaced by something cold and empty. He had requested to meet with Admiral Way. The Admiral had refused. Instead, the humans sent someone else. Vance walked across the crystal floor, her steps slow but steady. Her back was wrapped in bandages. Her face was pale from blood loss and exhaustion, but her eyes were clear, and there was something in them that made one look away. She stopped before him, this small human woman he had tried to murder. Behind her stood a squad of human Marines, their weapons ready, their faces hidden behind armored helmets. They had fought their way across half a galaxy to reach this moment. They had destroyed the greatest fleet in the sector, and now they stood silent, waiting for their ambassador to speak. High Speaker said. Her voice was calm, almost gentle. Do you remember what you said when you shot me? You said that humans were too violent, too unpredictable, that we could never be trusted. Said nothing, there was nothing to say. You studied our history, continued. You read about our wars. You saw how we fight each other, century after century, and you decided that this made us weak. You thought that a species so divided could never stand together against an outside threat. She took a step closer, could see the pain in her movements, the effort it took for her to remain standing, but she did not stop. You were wrong. Our wars taught us things that peaceful species never learn. They taught us how to survive, how to adapt, how to keep fighting when everything seems lost. They taught us that when someone attacks our people, when someone threatens our home, when someone shoots one of us in the back, we come together. We forget our differences. We become something more than individuals. His mandibles clicked nervously. What do you want from us? Territory, resources, slaves? Shook her head. We don't want your worlds. We don't want your wealth. We don't want to rule over you or punish your people for what their leaders did. Then what? Demanded. What could possibly satisfy you after what I did? Smiled. It was not a cruel smile, but it was not kind either. It was the smile of someone who understood exactly what she was about to do. Witnesses, she said. We want witnesses. Over the next hours, humanity's demands became clear. Every species in the galactic conquered would acknowledge what had happened on Prime. They would record it in their histories. They would teach it to their children. They would not be destroyed or conquered, but they would live with their shame broadcast across every corner of the galaxy. The species who had watched get shot, who had said nothing, who had allowed murder to happen in front of their eyes, they would acknowledge their silence. They would admit that they had chosen to do nothing, and that admission would follow them forever. You're not going to kill us, said slowly as understanding dawned. You're going to make us remember. Yes, said. That's exactly what we're going to do. Every time you meet a new species, they will know what you did. Every time you try to build an alliance, they will remember that you break your own sacred laws. Every time you claim to offer peace, others will wonder if you're lying. Stared at her. In some ways, death would have been easier. And there's one more thing, continued. Humanity will be admitted to the galactic conquered, not as newcomers begging for acceptance, not as inferiors hopping for scraps from your table. We will join as equals with the same rights and powers as any other member species. The conquered will never accept that, protested. The other species will refuse. 3 of them have already agreed, said. And they approached us during the battle. They were afraid of you for 10,000 years. They're not afraid anymore. Others will follow. And those who don't, well, they can explain to the galaxy why they support a species that murders ambassadors during peace ceremonies. The negotiations continued for weeks, led them despite her injuries, despite the doctors who begged her to rest. She had started this. She would finish it. Admiral Wei came to visit her one evening as she sat in a medical bay reviewing diplomatic documents. He stood in the doorway for a long moment, watching her work. You could have died, he said finally. Down there in the dark with no one coming to help, you could have given up. But I didn't, said. She touched the bandages on her back, feeling the sealed wounds beneath. That's the thing about humans, Admiral. We don't give up. We don't die quietly. We survive and we remember, and we make sure that the people who hurt us can never forget what they did. Wei nodded slowly. They'll study this for centuries. Every military academy, every diplomatic school, every species in the galaxy. They'll analyze what happened here and try to understand how 12 ships defeated 300, how one wounded woman brought an empire to its knees. Let them, said, let them study us. Let them try to understand. The more they learn, the less likely they are to make the same mistake. She stood, wincing at the pain that still burned through her back. She walked to the window and looked out at the stars. They pledged tranquility, she said softly. Then they fired on a human from behind. Now they'll learn what tranquility really means. Peace through strength, Wei asked. No, shook her head. Peace through consequence. When you break your word to humanity, we don't just survive. We make sure the whole galaxy knows what you did. We make sure no one ever forgets. We make sure that the next species thinking about betraying us remembers what happened to the last one. Behind her, the galactic conquered was already beginning to change. Old alliances were crumbling. New ones were forming. Species who had been silent were suddenly speaking out. The power structure that had existed for 10,000 years was shifting, rebalancing, transforming into something new. And at the center of it all stood humanity, young and small and violent, yes, but also unbreakable, unforgiving, and absolutely unwilling to be shot in the back without consequence. Vance watched the stars and smiled. This time it was a kind smile. Humanity had arrived, and they were here to stay.